Welcome to St. Francis of Assisi Church in La Quinta. My name is Father James McLaughlin. I'm the pastor of this beautiful church. We're so proud of our church. We're so proud of its history. We're so proud of the artwork here in the church, and we hope that we will be able to share this beautiful church with you. Our docents every Sunday after the 9:15 Mass and the 11 o'clock Mass invite our visitors and anyone who would like to join them to hear more of the history of our parish, of our church, and to an explanation of the artwork. You're very welcome to participate with them, and I'm delighted that we have now a presentation that you will be able to see, and our docents will take you around the church and explain something of our history and something of our beautiful artwork of the church that we are so proud of. So I welcome you to our parish of St. Francis of Assisi. God bless you.
Docents.
And I'm Ed Kozlowskis of the Docents, and we welcome you today.
A little history of the church to begin. Our first parish priest was Father Raymond Blewett. Before coming to the valley, Father Blewett was a spiritual advisor in the film industry. Now, if you're a movie buff, as I am, you know we don't have a spiritual advisor in the industry today, but this was 1972, and we did indeed. Father Blewett spent 2 years in Italy working on the film Brother, Sun, Sister Moon, which is the story of St. Francis and St. Clare. The director was Franco Zeffirelli, and during the filming, the two men became very fast friends. At the conclusion, they stood on a hillside in San Damiano, overlooking the movie set, and as the work crew dismantled the church, the two men vowed they would build a like church in a like location one day. Our St. Francis is the result of that vow. Father Blewett's next assignment took him to Rome, where he became ill, and the church decided he should no longer travel. They tasked him instead with opening a church in the Indian Wells, La Quinta area. For the first 10 years, there was no church. Father Blewett had his services at Crocker Bank. He thought it was a perfect location, since he said parishioners in this area would feel much more comfortable going into a bank than a church anyway. The locals began to call it St. Croc's. When it came time to build the church, Father called on his old friend Franco Zeffirelli, and the two sat down with the local architect, Robert Ricciardi, and the design for St. Francis was born. The church took 2 years to build at a cost of just over $1 million. The architecture is very typical to that found in northern Italy, and the design of the church very closely resembles the church in Assisi that Francis constructed in the 13th century. We had our first Mass here in La Quinta on Holy Thursday, October 1984. Many other Hollywood notables were involved in the building of the church. Bob Hope and the Annenbergs, of course, who had such a very large presence here. The first James Bond, Roger Moore, Frank Sinatra gave one of our very first readings, and parishioners who were here at the time said it was very common to see a black limo pull up in front. Father Blewett, Frank Sinatra, and Gregory Peck would jump out to check on the progress of the church. My favorite story of the early days. Frank Sinatra was hosting Prince Rainier at his compound, and Frank and his entourage brought him here to St. Francis for Mass. As a lark, they asked the prince if he would take up the collection. If you can imagine, putting your envelope in the basket, looking up and thinking, doesn't he look like? And it is he indeed.
Now let us take a look at some of the artwork in our church. One of the most dramatic elements in the church is the cross in the sanctuary. This particular sculpture was created in Italy out of a solid piece of pepper wood, except for the outstretched hand of Jesus. It is indeed a beautiful piece, and it depicts Jesus and St. Francis. I had a young girl once ask me, I didn't know St. Francis and Jesus lived at the same time. I said, they didn't. They were about 1,200 years apart. Well, what this cross depicts is the love of Jesus for St. Francis and the love of St. Francis for Jesus. Also on the altar, we have 3 pieces of Carrara marble. First of all, the pulpit. The pulpit depicts Jesus preaching from the back of St. Peter's boat. And then the actual altar piece depicts St. Francis and St. Clare. The other piece is the baptismal font, which shows the baptism of Jesus by St. John. Again, these are Carrara marble from Italy. This is the same marble that Michelangelo used when he created such beautiful pieces as the Pietà. 4 mosaics in the church. There is the background in the Blessed Virgin's Chapel. We have a mosaic of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Behind me is a mosaic of St. Peter and the denial of Jesus. And the last one we have that we'll be taking a look at in more detail is Jesus on the road to Emmaus. Now let's take a look at a mosaic in a little bit more detail. Okay? What we see over here is the mural of St. Peter in the denial of Christ. If one is close up to a mosaic, one sees what it's made of. A mosaic consists of stones, semi-precious metals, gold leaf, and up close you cannot see the image, but stepping back, the beautiful image appears. These mosaics were done by an artist from San Luis Obispo, Peter Ludoki, who did these mosaics in his studio, and then they were transported and installed here in St. Francis of Assisi. Now what you see in this particular mosaic is Jesus on the road to Emmaus. This is actually a triptych. It consists of 3 separate images. The crucifixion of Jesus, Jesus on the road to Emmaus, and the resurrection of Christ. This particular style of mosaic is Byzantine. It looks very similar to what one might find in a place like Venice in the cathedral or in a Greek church. I think it's our most beautiful mosaic. Now what you see behind me are some of the murals that we have in the church. We have 16 murals, 14 of them that go around the church, portray the life of St. Francis. We have 2 other murals in the back of the church, one showing the resurrection of Lazarus from the dead, and the other one showing the baptism of Jesus. Now these are murals. They were painted using acrylic paint on the walls of the church. These are copies of the originals that are in Assisi. These are copies of the originals which are in Assisi, and those items are frescoes, which meant that it was paint put into wet plaster. The originals were done by Giotto, who is known as the father of the Italian Renaissance. His style of artwork was completely different than what preceded. For example, we will notice in these artworks local peoples. Earlier artwork only depicted the Holy Family, saints, and other such individuals, never local people. These images are also three-dimensional, unlike the earlier works which were two-dimensional. These images also depict the background of Italy at the time. Other particular murals that we have here might show, for example, the interior of a church. The murals that we have in the church were done by an individual called Alexander Rosenfeld. Mr. Rosenfeld worked for the film industry, and his job was to make copy of paintings for movies. He was 80 years old when he started on these murals, and it took him 2 years to complete them. He worked 6 days a week from 8 to 5. Now the story is told that Mr. Rosenfeld had family in Poland who were saved from the Nazis by a Catholic family. Because of this, he wanted to do something for the church. So in turn, we have these wonderful murals. Mr. Rosenfeld also had some whimsy. One of the murals has on one of the saints the face of the pastor at the time, and another mural has the face of his wife. The murals that you see here portray the life of St. Francis. In this first one, we see St. Francis praying to the cross of San Damiano where he had his conversion. In the second mural, St. Francis is giving away his earthly possessions so he could go and preach and work with the poor. I'd now like to point out another mural. The other mural I'd like to point out is St. Francis in a church with a creche. St. Francis is accredited with bringing the nativity scene, the creche, into churches to relive the nativity scene. Remember now that people at this time were illiterate. How could you recall the story of the nativity? One of the ways was like looking at the scene with Jesus, Mary, Joseph, the farm animals, and the like. The other thing I want to point out on this particular mural is the fact that everybody is smiling. That is a change from the original frescoes where people were all very dour looking. Now let's take a look at some of the other artwork in the church.
And now, on to some more of the artistic treasures in our church. The wrought iron chandeliers that you see throughout the nave of the church were done by a local artisan, Dino Estrella from La Quinta. The colored stained glass windows that you see in the church were crafted and handmade in Ireland and shipped here to La Quinta. On both sides of the church, we have the glorious and the joyous mysteries of the Rosary. at the top of the choir loft, we have the beautiful rose window, which shows the Madonna and Child surrounded by the sacraments. The light streaming through the window makes it an exquisitely beautiful piece.
The church houses a wonderful organ, as you can see. This is the Van Zorn Rogers organ, which has 3 manuals, 57 stops, and 4,000 pipes, all handcrafted in Europe. This is a beautiful instrument, and as you see, it is housed below that large stained glass rose window that Mary just discussed. The organ sounds wonderful in our acoustically well-designed church. Thank you for joining us on this video tour of the Church of St. Francis of Assisi in La Quinta. Please note that we have another video on Christ Chapel, also located at St. Francis.
Again, we urge you to join our docents on tour here at St. Francis during season January through April after the 9:15 and the 11 o'clock masses. Thank you for joining us today, and God bless.
And God bless you.